The title is Dealing with Challenging Behaviors. What I'd like to do is start with, what does ABA stand for? A is applied, meaning that the interventions used with the individuals are in their natural settings and they target behaviors significant for that person's social and day-to-day living. The B stands for behavioral, meaning that the interventions are based on behavioral principles. The A is for analysis, and the decisions that are made when you're using different programs and technologies are based on ongoing data collection to assess what is going on, is there progress being made. ABA is not just for students with autism spectrum disorder. ABA is not just one program. It's not a kit. It's not just for schools or therapy settings. It's not the Lovaas method, which many people associate it with, nor is it the discrete trial training or the DTT or ITT, intensive teaching trials. ABA is not just for special education. If you think about it, behavior modification and behavioral interventions are around all of us, and they've been around for some time. When you think about weight loss programs, smoking cessation programs, incentives, and bonus plans, in fact, in our work and in the schools and such we see, they're oftentimes based on these behavioral interventions. Another point in getting started today is something very important, is that behavior is not all bad. As a behavior therapist, oftentimes, of course, going into someone's school or home, many times we are addressing problem behaviors. That being said, when I look at this list, the list of behaviors on the left are behaviors that we really want to see. Pointing to objects or pictures, taking someone's hand, even pulling someone to get to something they want, manual sign language, handing a picture to an adult, such as using a picture exchange program. When you ask or answer a question, these are behaviors. Reading a book, asking help or permission, following directions, dressing and feeding yourself, playing a game with a peer, organizing and planning. These are all the behaviors that we really want many of our children and my students to all engage in. That being said, oftentimes as a behavior therapist, I'm brought in for the behaviors on the right side of the column, which would be crying or screaming, repeating phrases or actions over and over again, grabbing and taking something without asking, putting your hands on your ears if it's a noise that you don't like, biting your hand or your shirt, hand flapping, destroying materials, saying no, jumping up and down, pushing things away, refusing to follow rules of games. Those are more of the behaviors that a behavior therapist is brought in to address. Important thing in understanding behavior, though, is behavior is caused. There are antecedents or things that happen before the behavior or triggers that are noted. The behavior is observable. Now, you can have private behaviors that, of anxiety, for example, but there are outside behaviors that are representative of that internal or private behavior. When you're hungry, that you really don't observe necessarily hunger, but you observe a person looking for food or reaching for food. Communication, behavior is communication. It's indicating some information. When we behave in a certain way, we are trying to communicate something. It serves a function, and that's a great part of what I'm about, is trying to figure out why. Why does that person engage in that behavior? Now, the function is not usually the problem for these challenging or problem behaviors. So if I am hungry or thirsty, there's nothing wrong with that. That's the function. I'm hungry or thirsty. But by grabbing your water bottle or taking the food from your plate, that is where there's a problem behavior. The other thing that we see sometimes too is the same behavior may have different functions. So when I want something, I might reach something. When I also want to get rid of something, I might swipe it away or push it away. So the way my hand moves towards something may have different functions. Challenging behaviors or problem behaviors, though, are very important to address because they interfere with learning new skills. If you're engaged in a problem behavior, then you cannot be learning those new skills. And of also very significant importance to me and those of as you as well, I'm sure, is that sometimes these problem behaviors isolate the learner because other children and or adults do not want to be with the person who's engaging in those behaviors. I often feel like I'm a part of like a CSI or something. What happened? Many times if I just ask families or students, teachers, they may say, nothing. Nothing happened. It came out of the blue. She was just upset. Well, that really doesn't help me, that just to say those words. What I'm trying to do is figure out what is the function of these behaviors and why did they engage in those behaviors. When we think about the functions of behaviors, we think about basically either you're doing some things to gain something, such as to get an object or an activity or attention from someone, or you want to gain sensory, the smell, the touch, the taste of something, the visual looking at something. Those are things we might gain. Now, escape is oftentimes a really big part of the function of inappropriate behaviors, because when you want to get rid of something or escape it, you want to get rid of an object, an activity, or attention potentially from people or staff or other children. So those escape behaviors are oftentimes problem behaviors because you want to get rid of something. So you're trying to escape or avoid it in the first place. Also, people can do things to escape or avoid sensory. You don't like the touch of a texture, the smell, the sound. People do things to get rid of or escape the sensory. What behavior analysis and behavior analysts do, and it's also suggested in school programs when you're going to be creating a behavior plan to help address behaviors, is to do a functional behavior assessment, trying to figure out the function of the behavior. And these are the outcomes of a good functional behavior assessment. You will be identifying and defining the challenging or inappropriate behavior. And very precise, not just the person gets upset or has a tantrum, describing that tantrum, that the person throws objects to the floor, runs towards the door. What is the behavior? If it's self-injury, describing, places open hand on face, slaps face in that manner, or any other of those behaviors. Then we're trying to identify, so we may have a hypothesis, what we think is the function of the behavior. And so that we think that the person is doing this because they are getting a demand, or they do want to escape that demand. So that might be our hypothesis. When the outcome should be that after we've done data, we've figured out that we can see that there's a change in the person when the demand is placed on them, perhaps, then we see this inappropriate behavior. So we've identified the function. But what's really critical as well is, what are the strategies that you know and the staff know and family know that could help prevent these behaviors? What are preventive or antecedent strategies? What could I do differently that would prevent these behaviors? The next would be also a very important piece, because you don't just get rid of a behavior. If a person is doing something and they're using that as a communication and it's working for them, you just don't get rid of it. So grabbing for water out of someone else's hand needs a replacement, and what should that replacement be? Would be ask, sign, in some way request for that water. We have to teach those strategies, those alternative replacement behaviors. We have to be cautious too that we make sure that it's easy to access what the person wants, potentially, so that the inappropriate behavior isn't easier, too much easier. The consequences that won't maintain the inappropriate behaviors. So that's another piece of these ABCs of behavior, we call it, is that what happens after the behavior? Does what happens after the behavior maintain that inappropriate behavior? So the child that doesn't want to come to the table and do some work with the teacher or the therapist, who screams and cries, and runs towards the door, and then the staff just walks away and says, okay, you can do this another day, don't worry. Well, that behavior then would be reinforced by that escape. So we might have to think of what the consequences would be that won't maintain those inappropriate behaviors. Oftentimes, too, we get some really good input for the IEP and for specially designed instruction. So these are those preventative strategies that might help to support the person so that they can set the stage to succeed and not engage in those inappropriate behaviors. We then have those are the input for the behavior plans. And oftentimes it's just not a once and done because behaviors change and we want to keep some data and to make sure that things are still being effective. And we may need, maybe we'll have a different behavior emerge. We might need to address that as well. What I was mentioning before is these ABCs of behavior, and we're talking about antecedents. So that's the A. That means it's the setting event. What happened immediately before the behavior is oftentimes, is it the demand being placed? Is it time to put away toys? Is it time to say hello to someone or talk with someone? What was triggering that behavior? Was it a person, a place, an activity, a sound, a smell? Is it a demand or is it even a request? Could you come over here? Some children, that might be a trigger for them. There can be some slow triggers, and we can often see this. And if the beginning of the day, the child may have some things going on, and then the day is going on, and now towards the afternoon, that there is a culmination of these the same thing that was bothering the student. Now it was slow, but it has built up. There's also quick triggers. Oftentimes it might be that demand or request or put away your toys, time to transition or change from one activity to another. Very important also are the things that we call these hunger or thirst or pain or fatigue. So if you are hungry or you're thirsty or you're in discomfort or you're tired, those are setting events. And I think that helps some people understand why there can be a change one day to the other. And it's like, it seems like the child or the student has no problem with this activity, but it seems like on Monday afternoon at 3:45, when I asked the child to transition from one thing to the other, that's when we are having an acting out event of possibly task refusal. Well, it could be fatigue at the end of the day. I've been keeping it together all day, and now it's the end of the day. I'm tired, so that antecedent for the behavior might be more obvious then. Then the B in the ABCs is the behavior or the response, and as I mentioned earlier, that we do have private behaviors. When we're anxious, some of us may talk faster. We may be not making as much eye contact when you're anxious. There's different behaviors on the outside that may be representative of this private behavior. We try to really describe it so that it's observable and that other people could understand it, because oftentimes there's data collection, and we want it to be clear that if there's 2 or 3 staff that may be sharing the job of doing data collection, that we all agree what is this behavior that we are collecting data on. And this data is important so that we can make decisions. Is it working or isn't it working? Isn't what we're doing as we go forward and making changes in the plan, is it helping? If it's a positive that we want to see increase, is the behavior increasing? If it's a behavior we want to see decreased, is it decreasing? The C is the consequences. What happened after the behavior? And that includes corrective feedback, where we might say, good job, or you think you could make that letter a little differently, that extra feedback we might give. So it's what happens after the behavior. So in some places, what I mentioned before was that the demand was actually removed. Well, that was the consequence, and then we have to take note of that. So when a person's doing ABC data collection, they would write the A, the B, and the C as best as possible to really give an anecdotal record as to what has occurred. The one thing to worry about consequences, though, is that consequences are not all bad. It's just the timing. Consequences occur after the behavior. Oftentimes I'll have people say, oh, he or she has to learn how to accept the consequences of his behavior. Well, that could be a positive, that you've earned an activity, or you earned to go with your class trip, or go down, go to the school store. Those are your consequences as well. The important part of understanding when you're working with children that are presenting challenging behavior is, what's important is we really need to know about reinforcement. So when we talk about reinforcement, there's words of use, positive and negative, but reinforcement means that arrow, that behavior is increasing. So for some, attention is reinforcing, and it's reinforcement. Depends on the student and or the adult. For some, stickers, or for some it's tokens, earning tokens to use towards purchase of items or access to favorite time on a computer or iPads. For others, it's rewards or a treasure chest. For some, it's games or toys. But for some people, reinforcement is escape or avoidance, and that is because it's called negative reinforcement, which is sometimes confusing, but really what it means is that I'm removing something. So I'm removing the demand, or I'm escaping that demand. I always think about negative reinforcement, and if I'm driving down the road and I see a police car behind me, I may be driving within the right speed limit, but it's very anxiety-provoking for me to see the police car behind me. So what I might do is artificially get off an exit, or go and stop at a convenience store just to escape the uncomfortable feeling that is provoked by the person riding behind me. So that's just my little way to remind myself about reinforcement. The other part about reinforcement in all of these behaviors that we're talking about is that there's oftentimes multiple things going on. So another example of reinforcement would be when you're in the checkout lane of a supermarket and the child is asking, can I have some candy, can I have some gum, can I have some gum? And the parent is persisting and saying, no, you can't have gum, we have some at home, you can't have this snack, it's almost time for dinner. And the child keeps it up, keeps it up, keeps it up. Then the parent caves and says, oh, all right, just this one time, and gets them one pack of gum. Well, what's happened there is two reinforcing incidents were occurring at the same time. The parent received negative reinforcement because they got rid of the noisiness of their child, who was, kept pestering and pestering. And the child was positively reinforced to do that same behavior again, because it ultimately yielded what they wanted. So there's always I always think about Shrek's layer of onions. There's a lot of things, multiple things going on, and that's important to step back and try to assess what's going on. The other piece is this punishment piece, and punishment means basically what happens after the behavior is really making behaviors decrease, then punishment is effective. The problems with punishment oftentimes are punishment only works when the punisher is available, if it's a person, if it's very obvious to the person. So some examples of punishment could be simple correction. For others, it's overcorrection, having the person do the same thing over many, many times. For others, it's restitution, putting the room back to the way it was before, tossing materials around. For others, it might be timeout, and timeout isn't necessarily a place, but it's removal of what is reinforcing to that person. So for some children, the loss of a parent's attention is timeout because they're not receiving that positive attention. I often think of high schoolers that if their punishment for acting out in high school is out-of-school suspension, they're probably not as punishing as they think they are, because the person may have wanted to get out of that school. Response cost basically means that if I've earned some tokens, then if I do a certain behavior, then I may have to pay back or lose two of those tokens, depending on a contract, and it should be very clearly spelled out. The real concern is whenever designing these plans is to be very careful that for some individuals, that loss of something, they get extremely upset, and it's very difficult to stay with that program effectively. For others, it's that, let's say the child or the student has to earn so many tokens for Friday afternoon school store or for a movie or a special event. Well, what's happened is if it's Wednesday and the student's already lost all his tokens, he basically has no motivation to continue to behave well if it's not, if there's no way that he can earn back those tokens. So that's to be, that's a very specific plan that has to be careful, not to have too many loopholes. The other is corporal punishment, which should be like spanking and such, and I'm not recommending that. I just put this here because that is a form of punishment. Now we're talking about reinforcers, and this is something I often think of when I think of some individuals who have very restricted interests, that that the less you have, the more valuable it is, and I try to keep that in mind. The other is the loss is greater when you have less to lose. So I think that those two things really I keep in mind when I'm writing behavior plans or trying to get some input into some behavior interventions. When I think about reinforcers too, I think this is something that we can do something and change a bit because we can shift availability of reinforcers. So for example, when the mixed nuts, the can of mixed nuts gets to the house, I really like cashews first. So cashews I really enjoy. Well, when there are no cashews left, my next up is really, I do like pistachios. Then after that, I might want a different one. So, what it is this helps me to kind of think about what, if a student or a child has so many things readily available, it's difficult to manipulate the reinforcing value of it. As you see, if something is not as available, something else may take over as being reinforcing. And that's what I try to do when I have children with or adults that I'm working with that have some interests that I may want to shape up into possible reinforcers. Of course, I don't want to, go down, take a child into a younger level. That being said, I don't have to, for a child, that may still like Barney, we can look at stickers of Barney or have pictures with Barney or use those things on a difficult worksheet. It might be something that would be available. I have many of the kids that may like Legos or Power Rangers or anime. These are different interests that become possible reinforcers. We try to also take from some children and adults who have very possibly like less appropriate social reinforcers, such as a string or ceiling fans, water or power lines, and try to figure out a way to shape that into more appropriate reinforcers. So I had a young guy who really liked water, so I found a book that had water in it. So he would sit, he did not enjoy looking at books, he didn't really enjoy that, so what I did was I found books that had something that he liked in it so that he would sit and attend to the story waiting for that picture towards the end of the book that had water in it. When we're thinking about adolescents and adults, we're often thinking about their interests and what's reinforcing to them, and whether it's technology or Dunkin' Donuts, Walmart, bowling, whatever, those are possibly reinforcing activities. And we don't necessarily have to have them earn to do those activities, but we can, if we have a student that has a behavior plan, then they might be able to either earn to access it, or we might use that on a chart or something to just give it a little bit more reinforcing value, just even looking at that chart. In terms of reinforcement and motivation, I often think about this roller coaster that's which for me, you could pay me $100,000 or more to say go on that roller coaster. I really would have no desire for, I don't even know what money would get me on something like that. That being said, you place one of my children on that and it's stuck, as a parent I would be up there walking up a ladder and getting up there, or getting up there as fast as I could. So our motivation changes depending on situations and circumstances around us as well. We're looking at the ABCs of behavior, the antecedent, which is the A, the B is the behavior, and the consequence is that what happened, okay? So that what happened after is that consequence. And That is a traditional emphasis, whether it be the punishment or the positive reinforcement or the negative reinforcement. But what I really see is the movement towards more of an antecedent strategies, setting up the child or adult to succeed. So we really want to practice the behaviors that we want to see. I think of this as setting the stage for success. When I'm thinking about strategies, I often think about what tools do I need, and I do this one to remind myself of my first apartment, and I had, wanted to hang up some pictures, and I maybe had a hammer and some screws, and I did get the job done, but it was not as efficient nor as, well done as it could have been. I have to think about what tools I need to get to what gain. So I think about, is it to learn a new skill? Is it to learn an appropriate or an acceptable replacement behavior? I might choose from different techniques to use for that. Do I want to increase a behavior that's already in the person's repertoire? Do I want to decrease a behavior, such as perseveration on the same topic, asking the same question over and over again, or talking about the same topic? This is very important. Can I honor the function, such as the student asking for a break? Or even asking the parent at home, can I have a break there that's during homework time? Will I be able to honor it? Or if the child is hungry and they're asking for something in the beginning when we're just learning language, we often, we'll say to do a lot of reinforcement up front to get that behavior, really strong. Well, and then the other piece is when you cannot honor the function. So a child or an adult that does not want to leave a building when there's a fire bell or a fire drill. You cannot honor that function. Even if you know that it's the planned fire drill, you cannot honor that function. And then following, I have identified for you is I picked some areas of target behaviors, whether to increase or to decrease, and then thinking about some strategies that might be successful in working, and some will be relevant to some of you and some to others. In the target behaviors to increase communication, I think about an appropriate means to request or protest rather than scream or cry, hit, run, cover your ears, turn away. This is a really important skill. We all need to be able to request or protest something. And so one of the first, and we mentioned, is functional communication training, really teaching a person how to do those behaviors of requesting and protesting. The other is this, what we call AAC, which is Alternative Augmentative Communication Systems. And this could be the manual sign language, and it can be high technology, such as like a Dynavox. It can be low tech, such as actually like a selection board that's very simple, or if I mentioned already, the picture exchange communication system. It's just not pictures, it's actually using those pictures as a means of communication, or as I said, like manual language, like sign language. Some others is a break card, and we've got to be careful that we don't teach that work is bad and break is good. That being said, many of us are always, might be looking forward to a break, but really oftentimes I'll, in the beginning, have a break card, but what I have to figure is how many breaks is it acceptable for the person to request in a different time frame. Often a good thing to help teach and interrupt problem behaviors is the parent or the staff notes the sign that the child or the adult is frustrated and cannot communicate at that moment. So you might want to distract them at that point and then interrupt, redirect, engage, and then reinforce in the appropriate behavior. Oftentimes, too, in the beginning of communication, you really want to practice and rehearse these things so that it's not just done in a therapy room or it's not just done in school. We really need to cross this across the home and the school and the community. It's one thing that you know water and you know the name for water, but you need to know how to ask for water when you're thirsty, not just when you're in therapy room or at your house, but when you're in school or you're at your after-school activity. Another very important area that we need to address oftentimes with problem behaviors is transition. I remember thinking about this and trying to think of how many different ways there is transition. And basically, anytime there seems to be a change, there's a transition. So it can be from person to person, from place to place, from activity to activity. And then you can throw in, is it from preferred to preferred? Is it from non-preferred to preferred? Preferred to non-preferred? It's all of those different ways that transition can take place. Oftentimes what really helps with transition is, and I'm a strong advocate of using a visual schedule. And in some cases it could be with the actual items. Other times it's with pictures, some with photos, some with printed words. Because that is like a neutral and not as personal as a voice prompting you to do something to make a change. And it's easier also to fade nonverbal, like visual prompts, rather than it is from that verbal prompt. Oftentimes you can use preferred items as distractors. That being said, you have to be cautious that it's not so distracting that it's disruptive. Many times we'll say, oh, he or she will do this for so-and-so, but not for another person. Or will do it for mom, won't do it for dad, won't do it for the opposite, or for a sibling, or for a friend. So in the beginning, when you really want to make this successful in practice, this transition piece, then have the preferred adult giving that direction or request. So if anything, when we had that fire drill, we would often know that it was a planned one. We would have a preferred staff on standby because we knew this young boy really had a problem with the sound of the bells, and so we would have his preferred staff be right there next to him just as it was going to be time, and then the preferred staff would say, let's walk outside. And he was much more readily going to do it because it was that person. Creating jobs that move the child down the hallways is really successful, but they can't be too contrived. They should be a real type of a job, like taking something to the office. We had one young man that really loved coming to school and he loved going home, but had problems in both getting on the bus in the morning and getting off at the bus in the afternoon at his house. And we created for him, it was that he always liked his hot chocolate with his grandmother after school when he got off the bus. So what we did is in the morning, the grandmother would take her packet of the cocoa mix and slip it to the bus driver. And then at the afternoon, when the bus pulled up at his house, the driver would give the packet of cocoa, and the grandma would be standing at the door with the cup, the mug, that he always had his chocolate in. And it helped him because it's basically helping give a direction and really reinforce getting to the end point, to the next place. Pre-specified reinforcers, oftentimes it can have something and show it that this is coming. Transition helpers, taking, like I said, something like a distractor or something that the person is taking to and from the next activity. So going to the gym, it was often helpful for the student to go pick up some of the equipment, giving that job of that, that he knew that when he got there, that's what he was going to do, is he was going to take the balls from the classroom and bring them out to the playground. That made going there so much easier. Another is for task completion, and oftentimes giving choice. Which one do you want to do first? And not many of us like to be told what to do and when to do it. So if you give me a little bit of a choice, which one you want to do first, it really can oftentimes make things that much more palatable. The other is many times, we have children asking, I want to do the computer, I want to do this, I want to watch my show, I want to do this and this. Making sure you put in the forefront what you want the person to hear, which is you will get that computer time after you've done this. So, if a person just hears, no, you can't have computer now, you can have it after dinner, they might not have heard all those other words. They just heard can't or won't or don't. So basically put in the forefront what you want the person to know is that you can have those cookies. It's after you eat your meat or your dinner. Visual schedules, once again, and for some people timers are very helpful. For others, I've seen some people that find timers aversive. The next slide, I'll show you there's some, you can turn the sound off for some, and you can see time lapsing visually. Task completion is really important, is that oftentimes it's that 80-20. 80% easy, 20% hard tasks. And they even did it with like math sheets. So if you have 10 difficult math problems and you need to sit and do them, versus you have 30 problems, but only 10 of them are difficult. And because then you're doing 1 plus 1, wow, I know that one, yes. So that really that 80-20 rule, and is very important to have just as many, like those hard tasks are interspersed with easy, so you're getting that success. It's like a momentum of behavior. The adult attention oftentimes and proximity is oftentimes you don't need to be directly engaging as much as being in proximity. Sometimes in classrooms, it's where the seating is in the room will help. For others, it's collaboration. You're going to do some, I'll work with you on others. The preferred adult as well can help. I often find it helpful, especially if you're trying to really increase task completion, is be sure you reinforce what you want, which is that the task is completed. So I might set a timer and sit, and I need to do my paperwork or my checkbook or go through some notes here. You sit at the table, to my student or my child that I'm working with, and I might say, you do your work, I'll do mine, and then we have that proximity. And also, then when it's done, I try to refrain from every 2 minutes giving reinforcement or talking. I really try to stay with the task, but I want to reinforce that it's done, it's completed. The high probability is often helpful. If I know that someone likes to pet their dog and they like to give it a dog biscuit, for example, or that would be just in the home, you could say, give the dog a pet, get him his biscuit, and put away your backpack. So what you've done is you've done like 2 in your mind, yes, yes, and then you just do the third one. So the probability of you're going to do the next one is a high probability sequence. These are some of the visual timers that are available, and there are many of them out there. Some people use the egg timer as well. Following directions, here we are talking about, some visual supports. Oftentimes photoing, or videoing what it looks like to follow those directions is very important. And I've had kids that really sometimes didn't know exactly what the directions meant. And just being cautious to be clear, I'm not talking to speak, down below the person's level, but be careful that you're not confusing. Oftentimes when children or adults are confused, it looks like they're not following directions, but really they didn't understand them. The other is sometimes I use nonverbal signals or manual signs. I teach a handful of them in regular ed and special ed. Often, it's like asking someone, can you help me with something? Is it oftentimes a nice way for some to get them on board about following directions. For some it's humor. I have one young girl that if you say, clean up your palace, princess, she'll be more likely to clean up her room than not. Here's some examples of, a very basic visual schedule using some of those like PECS pictures. And I'm always cautious to be careful that I'm not confusing the child that this might be a schedule versus where there's not as much choices to the order of doing these activities versus an actual schedule as this is what you're supposed to do in the order you're supposed to do it. The other on the left side is more for an adolescent or a middle high schooler with color coding and make it really more fun and spice it up. Also using visual schedules on iPads and with timers and such can be very positive. Spend a little bit of time here on social skill challenges, and this is something that it could be a whole other day of talking about social stories and social skills. And when you think about challenges for social interaction, there are a good number of them, and the connections, and that's why I show that, is that we need to have all the connections there. And oftentimes you need the skill. You need to know how to play the game. So first, we oftentimes can teach how to play a game. The pragmatic language skills really, if there's a lack of understanding of the way a person says something or the nonverbal cues, it can be a challenge and can really interrupt with some social interactions. If a person's anxious and fearful and doesn't want to make mistakes and doesn't know how to approach people, that can be a problem. Speech intelligibility for some is difficult because they don't. The child gets upset if someone says, what did you say? Or they know people didn't understand them. Attention span. If you have a very short attention span, it's very difficult because someone is wanting to play a game with you, and then what happens is that you are there and they walk away. This is not going to be reinforcing that social interaction. You need to be organized, and that's why oftentimes we see kids that will say they like to play with adults, much older kids, or younger kids, because in either of those places, either one person's organizing for them, or with the younger kids, those games don't need as much organization, and or they're in the lead. Motivation. I've had some students that were not as motivated, and that's something always to keep in check, is that really finding out the motivation here for your child and or student, their motivation for social skills and social interaction. If they're too dependent on adults, oftentimes then they'll look to the adult, or the teacher or the parent, to do the communication back to a peer. We have to really be cautious to fade out our constantly giving those prompts so that those things can be reinforced by the other student or the other child. And restricted interest, which is what I'm talking about shifting over. I have this next slide because it reminds me that you can't teach how to swim on the bench in the locker room. You really need to be in the swim, in the pool. So I often think about, I try to figure out what is the strengths, what is my young man or young woman's strengths. Then I personalize the strategies. I find out if there's places that person can practice these activities with the parents. They might have scouts. They may have different religious activities. Are there places to practice their social skills with some support? In the beginning, a lot of real-time support and feedback, the most to least support. That being said, it's a double-edged sword of just the right amount of support to push in to not hinder the relationship, but making sure that it doesn't go south if the person is trying to practice a positive social skill. I often try to figure out what's popular with the peers. What are the games the kids are watching, TV shows, the language, and I try to use that with my students to really kind of bring them up to speed with what their peers and what other kids are doing. I have often gone in the community and videoed or photoed my guys or girls and shared it back to the school, because maybe this is a young boy that really didn't talk much in his school setting, but if another student saw that he played karate, they were like, wow, I didn't know he could do that. And that was a hook for him to have talk and hang out with another kid that possibly would never have known that. So this is like a social engineering piece here. Some people, I have a young girl that used to get very upset with people being in places where she wasn't expecting, or in this case, she didn't like to separate from the same floor as in the room of the house as her mom. So we had pictures of her and her family in different rooms in the house, and we'd do like a, where do you think mom could be now? And we would take her in and out of different rooms in the house, just so that she understood mom would still be back. She was physically somewhere, dad or sister. When we're doing these strategies, we'll increase the appropriate play. There's some really, we might bring in siblings or other children to model, and there's some video modeling of actually play sets like the pirate ships and the doll houses and such, and how do you play those games, actually show some of those games. I often pair a preferred object with a non-preferred, such as so maybe if I might have snack time while we're also doing with a puzzle, which maybe in the beginning was going to be less desirable. Offering choices, morphing, or as I said before, moving over some of those restricted interests into more appropriate or accessible things. Introducing things gradually, and in the beginning introduce the toys gradually, not with other children. I've also used a lot of the lunch bunches, oftentimes available in the schools. You ask your social workers or the guidance counselors, or speech and therapists oftentimes may work on with a lunch bunch. Play dates when guys and girls are older, they might meet at community activities. Seating arrangements, when you're trying to do this, you might think about where is the best seating for your child. Not too close to the triggers, but possibly near a good peer model and proximity to staff. Role play, sometimes if someone has characters, I have a young girl that really liked her American Girl dolls, we would have them act out things and picture them, and I'd use actually use PowerPoint and just pop in some pictures, and we'd have the girls acting out some of the things that she couldn't understand, like mind your business. It was very difficult for her to understand that. Assigning a job during social activities. For some people, it's much easier if I have a job. Give me something to do during outdoor recess. I'm in charge of getting the chalk out, and I'm in charge of holding the clipboard when we do attendance coming back in. That gets us in and out of that area. Social stories is a very good tool. The Gray Center, Carol Gray, in 1991-ish, had developed this idea of creating these social stories and trying to help individuals understand perspectives of others and behavior. Video or photo modeling is very good as well. Acting out, I said this was a young girl who didn't understand the behavior system, so we created it at home, red, yellow, green, and she was telling me, Barbara, you're on red. So when I would be acting out. Here's some pictures of when we talk about bringing other playmates from class to increase our sphere of friendship. Oftentimes cooking is a big hit with others. Sometimes we have kids that don't understand the rules in the schoolroom, so we might set up the therapy area that looks like a bit more like a school. When we think about play dates, and I'm trying to think of a name for this for older adolescents, but when you think about play dates, you really need to plan and structure it, have just right timing, include a snack, make a list together. What are the activities we're going to do? So we make an activity list of 3 things each. We put them in a hat and we pull out, and we're going to each, by the end of the day, this time we're going to have played with like 2 or 3 things each. Social engineering, kids from different areas, photo or video, potentially for feedback, and monitor, don't hover. When I think about this is that, very much is that behavior change is not just about the child, and we look in the mirror, and we're the ones that make our changes. These are some strategies that are in your handouts, and thank you very much.